Ancient farmers transformed deserts into gardens and mountains into grain stores. We are exploring 35 civilizations whose agricultural genius literally built the world we know today. By the end of this journey, you will understand exactly how ancient farming techniques still influence what you eat and how you live. How did the Inca grow potatoes on frozen mountain peaks, and why did the Aztecs build floating farms in a lake? What forgotten wisdom from these master farmers could help us solve modern food crises? What single crop do you think had the greatest impact on human history? The very first farmers stared out at a land between two rivers, a sun-baked plain that seemed better suited for dust than for dinner. This was Mesopotamia, a name that means the land between the rivers, and here, around 10,000 years before the Common Era, humanity made one of its most profound leaps. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flooded with seasonal fury, bringing life-giving water but also destructive chaos. The Mesopotamian genius was not just to accept this gift but to command it. They became masters of control, digging the world's first extensive networks of canals to tame the wild waters and direct them to their fields. Think of the sheer audacity of that project, a society organizing itself not just to plant seeds but to redesign the very landscape. They invented tools like the shaduf, a simple yet brilliant counterweighted lever that allowed a single farmer to lift water from a canal and pour it into a field. It was a technology of patience and persistence, a machine that turned human effort into agricultural abundance, but their innovations did not stop at water. They looked at their fields and understood a fundamental truth that eludes many even today, that soil can become tired. So they devised organized crop rotation, methodically planting different crops in a sequence that kept the earth fertile and productive year after year. Their fields flourished with barley and wheat, the founding staples of the Western diet, alongside sweet dates and a bounty of vegetables. This was not just farming, it was the birth of an economic engine. The surplus of food they created was the fuel that powered everything else. It meant that not everyone had to spend their days in the fields. This food surplus allowed for specialization, for the emergence of potters, weavers, soldiers, priests, and scribes. It was the agricultural wealth of Mesopotamia that built the first cities, that fed the minds who developed writing to record harvests and trades, and that established the complex social structures we recognize as civilization itself. From their sun-drenched fields between two rivers, the Mesopotamians created a template for the world, proving that with water, wisdom, and relentless will, you could build an empire from the soil up. While the Mesopotamians were engineering control over their rivers, another civilization was learning to dance with one. The Nile was not a force to be tamed, but a rhythm to be followed. For the ancient Egyptians, the river's heartbeat dictated the very pulse of life. Each year, with a predictability that felt divine, the Nile would swell, burst its banks, and spread a layer of rich, black silt across the sun-bleached land. This was not a flood to be feared, but a blessing to be harvested. Their genius lay in capturing this gift. They constructed vast, low-lying basins surrounded by earthen walls. When the river rose, gates would be opened, flooding these basins and trapping the precious water and silt. After the river receded, the trapped moisture would sustain crops for the entire growing season. It was a system of passive brilliance, turning the desert itself into a garden. Their entire calendar was built around this cycle. The year was divided into 3 seasons: Akhit, the inundation, when the land disappeared under the water; Perit, the growing season, when the waters receded and seeds were sown into the fertile mud; and Shemu, the harvest, when the sun beat down and the grain was cut. This was so precise it formed the basis of our 365-day calendar. Their fields flourished with emmer wheat for bread, barley for beer, flax for the linen that clothed their society, and papyrus, the plant that would become their paper. They harnessed the power of animals, using oxen to pull plows through the moist soil, a revolutionary step that multiplied their efforts. For over 3,000 years, this symbiotic relationship with the river sustained a civilization of unparalleled stability and grandeur. The pyramids themselves stand as monuments not just to pharaohs, but to the agricultural surplus that fed the millions of hands that built them. The Egyptian farmer, working his assigned plot with a copper sickle, was the true foundation of an empire that viewed its river as a god. Yet while the Egyptians perfected their dance with the Nile, a civilization to the east was building a society so orderly it feels almost modern. The Indus Valley people, thriving over 4,000 years ago, created a world of quiet efficiency. Their cities, like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, were marvels of grid-like streets and advanced plumbing, but all of it was built upon the most sophisticated agricultural foundation of its time. They did not rely on one river, but on the entire system of the Indus and its many tributaries, weaving a network of irrigation canals that brought life-giving water to a stunning variety of crops. Their fields produced not just the expected wheat and barley, but also peas, sesame seeds, and sweet dates. And in one stroke of genius, they became the first known people to domesticate cotton. Imagine the revolution of that moment, turning a wild plant into a source of cloth that was both comfortable and durable. This single innovation clothed their population and likely became a valuable trade good. But their true agricultural mastery is revealed in their storage. They built massive, centralized granaries, but these were not simple mud brick sheds. They were engineered with sophisticated ventilation systems, clever ducts and air channels designed to keep the harvested grain dry and fresh in a humid climate, preventing rot and spoilage for months on end. This was food security on a grand scale. To manage the bounty of their land, they developed one of the world's first systems of standardized weights. This meant a bushel of grain measured in one city was identical to a bushel in another, creating a foundation of trust and efficiency for a vast economic network. They even mastered multiple cropping seasons, growing different foods throughout the year to maximize the land's yield. This incredible agricultural engine supported massive urban centers, each home to tens of thousands of people, all fed by the disciplined, peaceful farmers of the Indus Valley. Theirs was a quiet, sustained prosperity, a testament to the power of organization over conquest. While the Indus Valley thrived on quiet organization, the farmers of ancient China were mastering a different kind of power, one born from water and mud. In the lush, humid Yangtze River Valley around 8,000 years ago, they looked at the wild grasses and saw a future. They began the long, patient process of domesticating rice, a plant that would become the very soul of their civilization. This was not a simple crop. Rice demanded a completely new way of thinking about farming. It was a plant that loved to have its feet wet, thriving in flooded fields called paddies. To make this possible, the Chinese transformed entire landscapes. They carved stairways of green into mountainsides, creating breathtaking terraces that captured and held rainwater, turning steep, unproductive slopes into vast, cascading farms. This was farming as land sculpture, but their greatest innovation was control. They developed intricate irrigation networks of canals, dikes, and reservoirs. The pinnacle of this hydraulic genius is the Duzhongyan irrigation system, a monumental project built in the 3rd century before the Common Era. It was not a dam that blocked the river, but a system that cleverly split it, taming its destructive floods and channeling the water gently to the fields. Remarkably, it still functions today, watering farms across the Sichuan Basin. Their toolkit was equally revolutionary. Around the 6th century before the Common Era, they cast the first iron plows. These were not the simple digging sticks of old, but strong, efficient tools that could turn the heavy, wet soil of the paddies, preparing it perfectly for the delicate rice seedlings. This single invention multiplied their power to feed a nation. Yet their agricultural world was not built on rice alone. they practiced a sophisticated form of crop rotation, cycling between rice, drought-resistant millet, and protein-rich soybeans. This kept the soil fertile and their diet diverse. In the north, where the climate was drier, millet was the king of grains, demonstrating their ability to adapt their farming to vastly different environments. And in the quiet shade of mulberry trees, they pioneered another art, sericulture. They cultivated silkworms, unraveling their cocoons to spin the thread that would become the most coveted fabric in the ancient world. This was agriculture as high art and high economics. Every grain of rice, every soybean, and every length of silk supported a population explosion and a cultural flourishing that has endured for millennia. Rice became more than just food. It was currency, it was ritual, it was the measure of life itself, woven into the very language and spirit of a people. Deep within the emerald heart of the Mesoamerican rainforest, the Maya faced a paradox of plenty. They were surrounded by a vibrant, living world, yet the soil beneath the dense canopy was often thin and nutrient-poor. Their survival depended not on fighting the jungle, but on learning its rhythms and reshaping its wetlands into fertile gardens. Their most brilliant solution was the chinampa, a floating island of pure ingenuity. They wove giant mats from reeds and vines, piled them high with rich mud and decaying vegetation from the lake bottom, and anchored them to the swamp floor with willow trees. These were not just rafts, they were artificial plots of incredibly fertile land, constantly replenished by the nutrient-rich muck the farmers dredged from the canals between them. On these floating fields, they cultivated the sacred triad of maize, beans, and squash. The corn stalks provided a pole for the bean vines to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil to feed the corn, and the broad squash leaves spread out below, shading the soil and keeping it moist. It was a perfect, self-sustaining ecosystem of food, but their agricultural genius extended far beyond the swamps. On the jungle hillsides, they carved intricate terraces to capture precious rainwater and prevent the thin topsoil from washing away in the torrential downpours. They managed the forest itself, cultivating fruitful trees like avocado and sapodilla around their homes, creating sustainable household orchards. And in the dappled shade of the taller canopy, they grew their most treasured crop, cacao. The beans from these trees were so valuable they were used as currency, a literal form of money growing on trees. The Maya did not simply farm the land, they became partners with it, developing drought-resistant strains of maize and maintaining a celestial calendar so precise it told them exactly when to plant and when to harvest. This profound connection to the earth allowed them to build vast, glittering cities like Tikal and Karakol, supporting populations in the millions, all fed from the gardens they had woven into the very fabric of the rainforest. High in the Andes, where the air grows thin and the ground seems to touch the sky, the Inca confronted a landscape that appeared to defy farming. Mountains were not obstacles to them, they were opportunities. They saw steep, rugged slopes and envisioned staircases of green, and so they built, carving the mountains themselves into one of the ancient world's most breathtaking agricultural wonders. Their terraces were not simple steps. Each one was a masterpiece of engineering, built with precisely fitted stone retaining walls that have withstood centuries of earthquakes. Behind these walls, they layered gravel for drainage, then rich soil hauled up from the valleys, creating deep, fertile beds that clung to the mountainside. This prevented the thin topsoil from washing away in violent storms, and just as brilliantly created a cascade of microclimates. The higher terraces, bathed in cool mountain air, were perfect for hardy potatoes, while the sun-warmed lower levels could support fields of golden maize. Their innovation did not stop at the terrace wall. They looked at their most important crop, the potato, and asked a revolutionary question: how could they make food immortal? Their answer was chuño. They spread potatoes on the high, cold ground to freeze solid under the night sky, then trampled them underfoot to squeeze out the water, leaving behind a lightweight, freeze-dried tuber that could be stored for years, even decades. This was their secret to defeating famine, a food reserve that could feed their vast armies and support their cities through the harshest winters. To hold this bounty, they constructed tens of thousands of kolka, circular stone storehouses that dotted the hillside. Strategically placed on high, windy ridges, these buildings used natural ventilation to keep their contents cool and dry, a sprawling network of imperial pantries that guaranteed food security across an empire larger than the Roman Empire. The Inca did not simply farm one piece of land, they farmed an entire continent in miniature. Through a system called vertical archipelago, they established colonies in different ecological zones, from the coastal deserts up to peaks over 4,000 meters high. A single community would harvest salt and fish from the coast, maize from the temperate valleys, and potatoes and quinoa from the high Andes, all feeding into the same economic system. They cultivated an astonishing 3,000 varieties of potato, a testament to their deep understanding of the land. They did not conquer their environment, they collaborated with it, turning the entire mountain range into a single, sustainable, and unimaginably productive farm. Across the sea, on the sun-drenched slopes of rocky Greece, a different kind of agricultural miracle was taking root. The Greeks faced a land of harsh beauty, where mountains plunged into the sea and fertile soil was a rare treasure. Their genius was not in vast irrigation projects, but in making every single inch of their rugged landscape count. They looked at a barren hillside and saw not a limitation, but a potential vineyard. They embraced the three crops that thrived in their thin, dry soil, creating what we now call the Mediterranean triad. Grains, especially hardy barley that could survive where wheat struggled, formed the staff of life. But their true legacy was born from the gnarled olive tree and the cultivated grapevine. These were not just plants, they were pillars of an entire civilization. The olive provided oil for cooking, for light, for cleansing the body, and it became a sacred symbol of peace and victory. The grape, fermented into wine, was not merely a drink but a fundamental part of social and religious life, a commodity so valuable it was shipped across the known world in distinctive clay amphorae. To farm their difficult land, they became masters of the terrace, carving flat steps into the hills to capture precious rainwater and prevent erosion, creating cascading farms that clung to the slopes. Their tools were designed for efficiency, like the trireme plow, a heavier, iron-tipped implement that could cut deeper into the stubborn earth. They understood the science of the soil itself, with thinkers like Hesiod and Xenophon writing detailed manuals on farming, advising on crop rotation, and the importance of letting fields lie fallow to restore their strength. They even systematized beekeeping, managing hives to produce honey, the only sweetener they knew, which found its way into their food, their medicines, and their myths. This highly specialized, incredibly efficient agricultural system produced more than just food. It created wealth. The surplus of olive oil and wine funded the great city-states, building the fleets that secured trade routes and the temples that honored the gods. It was this agricultural foundation that allowed for the division of labor, freeing citizens from the relentless toil of farming to become soldiers, artists, philosophers, and lawmakers. The debates in the Athenian agora, the plays in the great theaters, the very birth of democracy, all were nourished by the oil, the wine, and the bread grown on those rocky hills. While the Greeks cultivated philosophy on their rocky hills, the Romans were building an empire on a foundation of grain. Their genius was not just in farming a single plot of land, but in organizing agriculture on a continental scale. They looked at the entire Mediterranean world and saw a single, massive farm, and they engineered it to feed millions. At the heart of this system were the latifundia, vast estates that were agricultural factories. These were not simple family farms, but sprawling enterprises managed with military precision, producing mountains of wheat, rivers of olive oil, and lakes of wine for export to every corner of the empire. To make this possible, Roman farmers became master soil scientists. They did not just take from the earth, they actively improved it, systematically amending their fields with manure from their livestock and with marl, a clay rich in lime, to balance the soil's acidity and restore its vitality. Their crop rotation systems were meticulously planned, moving from wheat to beans to fallow in a cycle that preserved the land's strength year after year. This knowledge was not left to chance. It was documented in detail by agricultural writers like Cotto, Varro, and Columella, whose manuals read like modern farming guides. They wrote with practical authority on everything from grafting fruit trees to create superior varieties, to precise methods of pruning vines for a better harvest, and even to early forms of pest control, using natural preparations to protect their precious crops. They harnessed water not just for irrigation but for power, pioneering the widespread use of water mills to grind grain on an industrial scale, freeing human labor for other tasks. And in their fields and pastures, they practiced the first systematic animal husbandry, selectively breeding cattle, sheep, and pigs for larger sizes, better wool, and more meat. A Roman soldier marching in Britain ate bread made from North African wheat, cooked with Spanish olive oil, and drank wine from Gaul. This seamless agricultural network, this ability to make the desert of North Africa and the damp fields of Britain all produce for Rome, was the true secret to their longevity. Their legions conquered, but it was their farms that sustained. The Romans engineered an empire of grain, but in the highlands of ancient Ethiopia, the Axumites built a kingdom from a grain so small it seemed almost invisible. This was teff, a native grass whose tiny seeds belied a nutritional power that could sustain armies. On the steep, rugged slopes of the Ethiopian highlands, Axumite farmers carved the mountains into a staircase of green terraces, preventing the precious topsoil from washing away in the violent seasonal rains. They were masters of capturing water, constructing sophisticated irrigation channels that funneled every drop of rainfall to their fields. Their agricultural world was a diverse and resilient tapestry. Alongside the hardy teff, they cultivated finger millet and barley, but their most remarkable crop was inset, the false banana. This was not a tree grown for its fruit, but for its massive, starchy root and the tender heart of its trunk, which could be fermented into a bread that served as a staple food for millions, a crop so reliable it was known as the tree against hunger. In the shade of their forest gardens, they cultivated another plant whose destiny would be global, the coffee shrub. They practiced advanced beekeeping, managing hives for honey that provided a vital source of sweetness and nutrition. This agricultural abundance did more than just feed a population, it fueled an economic engine. The surplus of food supported the growth of the magnificent city of Axum, with its towering stone obelisks and royal palaces. It was this foundation of plenty that allowed the Axumites to become a major trading power, their merchants sailing the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, exchanging gold, ivory, and that precious coffee for goods from Rome, India, and beyond. Their farms, clinging to the highland slopes, were the quiet power behind a kingdom that stood as a peer to the greatest empires of its time. The Khmer Empire did not just build temples, it built an entire hydraulic landscape. At its heart, in the sprawling city of Ankara, water was not a mere resource, it was the empire's circulatory system. They faced a climate of dramatic extremes, with torrential monsoon rains followed by months of punishing drought. Their solution was an engineering marvel that transformed this cycle into a perpetual harvest. They constructed immense, perfectly geometric reservoirs called barres, some so vast they stretched for kilometers, holding millions of cubic meters of water. These were not just ponds, they were artificial lakes, the empire's strategic water reserves. From these barres, a spiderweb of canals, dikes, and intricate irrigation channels spread across the land, directing life-giving water with precision to endless fields of rice. Their farmers cultivated a special kind of rice, a floating variety with stems that could elongate as the water levels rose in the flooded fields. This brilliant adaptation allowed them to grow rice in deep water, turning the seasonal deluge from a threat into an advantage. By mastering the flow, they could stagger their planting and achieve the unimaginable, not one, but up to 3 full rice harvests every single year. This triple yield was the engine of their power. It fed a population approaching 1 million people, a number unmatched by any medieval European city. This endless supply of food provided the labor, the sheer human power required to construct the breathtaking temple complexes like Angkor Wat, whose towers seemed to scrape the sky. Every stone in that magnificent structure was laid by a hand fed by the Khmer's rice. Their agricultural system was so resilient, so perfectly tuned to its environment, that it sustained a kingdom of unparalleled grandeur for over 6 centuries, a timeless empire grown from the watery fields of Southeast Asia. The Aztecs looked upon a lake and saw not a barrier but a field. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was a marvel of urban density built on an island, and to feed its 200,000 citizens, they performed a kind of agricultural alchemy. They transformed the very surface of the shallow lake into fertile land, creating the chinampas. These were not truly floating, but artificial islands constructed with astounding precision. They wove giant rectangular frames from reeds and stakes, then filled them with layers of rich mud dredged from the lake bottom and decaying vegetation. These beds, anchored by willow trees planted at the corners, became incredibly productive plots, their soil constantly replenished with nutrient-rich muck from the canals. This was a system of perpetual fertility. The canals themselves were not just waterways, but liquid highways for canoes carrying fresh produce to the city's markets, and a source of aquatic food like fish and waterfowl, adding protein to the diet. The Aztec farmer was a master of plant relationships, practicing companion planting long before it had a name. They grew maize, beans, and squash together in a sacred trio. The corn stalk became a living pole for the bean vines to climb. The beans fixed essential nitrogen in the soil to nourish the maize, and the broad leaves of the squash created a living mulch, shading the soil to conserve moisture and suppress weeds. This was a self-sustaining ecosystem on a single plot, but their crops did not stop there. Their chinampas blossomed with vibrant red chili peppers, golden amaranth whose seeds were ground into a nutritious flour, and a riot of flowers for ceremonial and medicinal use. This biodiversity ensured a balanced diet and year-round harvests, with some plots yielding up to 7 crops in a single year. Their hydrological genius extended beyond the garden plots. They understood that their lake system was a mix of fresh and salt water, and that their crops needed the fresh water to thrive. To solve this, they engineered massive dikes, enormous earthworks that ran for kilometers, effectively separating the freshwater lakes from the saltier ones and controlling salinity levels with the precision of modern civil engineers. These dikes also served as aqueducts and defensive barriers, a multi-purpose solution to a complex environmental challenge. The entire system was a testament to a society that saw itself as a partner with its environment, a civilization that built one of the world's largest cities on a lake, fed by gardens they had woven from water and mud. The Aztec chinampas were a miracle of water management, but in the vast, sun-scorched expanses of ancient Persia, farmers faced a far more relentless enemy: evaporation. Their solution was to take the water underground. They became masters of the Qanat, a subterranean river channeled by human genius. A Qanat began with a mother well, carefully dug deep into the base of a mountain to tap a hidden aquifer. From there, a gently sloping tunnel was carved, stretching for dozens of kilometers, sometimes over 50, to bring the water silently and invisibly to the arid plains below. This was gravity-fed irrigation at its most elegant. Because the water flowed in this dark, cool tunnel, almost none of it was lost to the thirsty desert sun, a revolutionary concept in a land where water was more precious than gold. These hidden arteries transformed barren landscapes into lush, productive land, enabling settlements and cities to flourish in the heart of the desert. On this life-giving water, Persian farmers cultivated fields of wheat and barley, but their true artistry was in their orchards. They cultivated peaches and pomegranates, fruits that became symbols of Persian abundance. Their knowledge of grafting and pruning was unparalleled, creating superior varieties of fruits and nuts that would eventually spread across the ancient world. They established the first known large-scale botanical gardens, living libraries of plant species collected from across their vast empire. These were not just pleasure gardens, but centers of agricultural research and experimentation. Their fields were managed with equal sophistication, using organized crop rotation and careful soil management to maintain fertility season after season, century after century. This entire agricultural powerhouse was supported by a highly organized imperial administration that maintained the khanats and stored surplus grain for times of drought. It was this robust, underground hydrated foundation of food and wealth that powered the successive Persian empires, the Achaemenid, the Parthian, and the Sasanian, allowing them to dominate the Near East for over 1,000 years. Their greatest monuments were not just the palaces at Persepolis, but the hidden tunnels that made them possible. A land of hills and valleys, where rain was a seasonal promise and fertile soil a hard-won treasure, the ancient Israelites carved their existence from a demanding landscape. Their survival depended on a profound understanding of balance, turning the rocky highlands of the Levant into a patchwork of productive farms. They mastered the art of the terrace, cutting flat steps into the steep slopes and reinforcing them with stone walls. These were not just fields, they were soil traps, meticulously designed to capture every drop of precious rainwater before it could rush downhill, taking the vital topsoil with it. Below the surface, they were just as ingenious, chiseling cisterns out of the very bedrock to store water through the long, dry summer months. This was farming as an act of conservation, a daily practice of saving and savoring every resource. Their wisdom extended deep into the rhythm of the years. The Hebrew Bible lays out an agricultural calendar that was also a spiritual and ecological mandate. Every seventh year, the land itself was given a Sabbath, a Shemitah, a full year of rest where fields lay fallow. This was not mere superstition. It was a revolutionary form of soil management, allowing the exhausted earth to recover its nutrients naturally. Their fields were a diverse mix of staple grains like wheat and barley, alongside the iconic trees of the region, the grapevine, the olive, and the fig. This was mixed farming at its most resilient, where crops and livestock supported each other. Sheep and goats grazed on stubble after the harvest, and their manure was carefully collected to fertilize the next season's planting, closing a perfect loop of sustainability. The fruits of their labor were processed with equal skill. They developed efficient olive presses, heavy stone wheels that would crush the bitter fruit to release its golden oil, a substance essential for cooking, light, and ritual. Their wine presses, carved directly into limestone bedrock, allowed the juice of the grape to ferment into wine, a cornerstone of their diet and culture. But this was not a purely practical endeavor. It was woven into the very fabric of their identity. The entire agricultural cycle was marked by pilgrimage festivals that doubled as community celebrations. Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, was a time of thanksgiving for the final harvest of the year. Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, celebrated the first fruits of the wheat harvest. These were not just holidays, they were the heartbeat of society, moments when shared labor turned into shared joy, reinforcing the bonds that held the community together through times of scarcity and abundance. Their faith and their food were inseparable, a covenant written not just on scrolls, but across the terraced hills they called home. While the Israelites nurtured their covenant with the land, another civilization was turning agriculture into a weapon of empire. The Carthaginians did not just farm, they engineered abundance on an industrial scale, creating a green wealth so potent it threatened Rome itself. Their entire economy was rooted in the soil of North Africa, where they transformed semi-arid landscapes into lush, productive estates. The heart of their agricultural wisdom was captured in a monumental text, the 28-volume farming manual written by a man named Mago. This work was so comprehensive, so valuable, that after Rome finally crushed Carthage, the Roman Senate itself ordered its translation into Latin, preserving the knowledge of their greatest rival. The Carthaginians were masters of the orchard, cultivating vast groves of olives and grapes, pomegranates and figs. Their skill with grafting and pruning was legendary, allowing them to create superior fruit varieties that yielded more and tasted sweeter. They understood the land deeply, systematically improving their soil by mixing in manure from their livestock and marl, a chalky clay that balanced the soil's chemistry. In a dry climate, every drop of water was sacred, and they engineered intricate irrigation channels that delivered moisture directly to the roots of their trees with minimal waste. But their most famous crop was not a food but a medicine. They cultivated a plant called silphium, which grew only in a narrow coastal region of their territory. This plant was a miracle of ancient botany, used for everything from cough syrup to contraception, and it became so wildly popular across the Mediterranean that it was worth its weight in silver. The demand was so intense that the Carthaginians could not cultivate it fast enough, and combined with overharvesting, the silphium was driven to extinction, a permanent loss to the ancient world. This agricultural powerhouse, with its scientific approach and vast surpluses of olive oil and wine, fueled their sprawling maritime trade network. It was the bounty of their farms that built the ships and funded the armies that challenged Rome for control of the Mediterranean, proving that the pen, the plow, and the pruning knife could be as formidable as any sword. On the island of Crete, the Minoans built a civilization that seemed to dance with the land itself. While mainland Europe was still in a rudimentary state, they were cultivating a sophisticated agricultural paradise, leveraging the island's dramatic geography to their complete advantage. They understood that the steep mountains and sheltered valleys created unique pockets of climate, and they farmed each one with a specialist's touch. On the sun-warmed hillsides, they carved terraces for their two most precious crops, the olive and the grape. These were not just plants to them, they were the foundation of their wealth. Archaeological excavations at their palace complexes, like the magnificent Knossos, reveal something astonishing, not just storerooms for oil, but entire industrial-scale production facilities. We find huge ceramic jars called pithoi, some taller than a person, and complex pressing rooms with stone basins and drains, proving that Minoan olive oil production was a major, organized enterprise. This was not just for their own lamps and kitchens, this was a product for the world. Their wine-making was equally advanced, with installations for crushing grapes and fermenting the juice, creating a commodity desired across the eastern Mediterranean. But their agricultural prowess went far beyond these two staples. In their fields, they grew grains like wheat and barley, and they mastered irrigation, channeling water to the drier parts of the island to ensure consistent harvest. And then there was saffron. Vibrant frescoes at the site of Akrotiri depict young women carefully harvesting the delicate purple crocus flowers, plucking the precious red stigma within. This was not merely a decorative spice, it was a multi-purpose treasure, used as a brilliant yellow dye for the fine textiles they wove, as a flavor for their food, and as a component in their medicines. This incredible diversity and surplus did more than just feed people. It built Europe's first advanced civilization. The bounty from their terraced hills and irrigated fields supported the architects and artists who designed the sprawling, labyrinthine palaces. It fed the skilled craftspeople who crafted exquisite pottery and jewelry, and it filled the holds of the ships that traded their oil, wine, and saffron for copper, ivory, and other luxuries. The Minoan farmer, tending his vines on a terraced slope, was the quiet engine of a society that flourished for centuries, a society whose prosperity was literally rooted in its deep, intuitive understanding of the earth. South of Egypt, the Nile carves through a land of golden dunes and stark beauty, a region the ancient world knew as Nubia. Here, the kingdoms of Kush and Meroe did not merely copy their northern neighbors, they forged their own agricultural destiny. While Egypt reveled in the Nile's predictable floods, the Nubian climate was harsher, its rainfall less reliable. Their genius was in cultivating resilience, turning to tough, drought-resistant grains that would become the backbone of Africa. Sorghum and pearl millet were their masterpieces, crops that could thrive where others would wither, storing water in their sturdy stalks and producing nutritious grains that could feed a kingdom through the leanest years. These were not just local staples, they were gifts to the continent, spreading from Nubia to nourish countless societies across Africa for millennia. To bring life to their fields, they employed a twofold strategy. They used a form of basin irrigation to capture the Nile's floodwaters, but they also looked at the river and saw potential beyond its banks. They became masters of lifting water, refining the shaduf and developing the sakia, a large, animal-powered water wheel. With the steady turn of an ox, the sakia could lift vast amounts of water from the river and pour it into canals that fed fields high above the floodplain, dramatically expanding the amount of land they could cultivate. Their fields blossomed with more than just grain. They cultivated cotton, developing a sophisticated textile industry that clothed their population in fabrics woven from their own soil. This agricultural and industrial prowess was underpinned by another innovation, iron. The city of Meroe became a powerhouse, its skies constantly smudged with the smoke from countless furnaces. Here, they smelted iron ore on an industrial scale, producing the strong, sharp tools that made their farming even more efficient, from durable plow tips to effective harvesting blades. This powerful agricultural engine, fueled by sorghum and driven by iron, did more than just sustain cities. It built an empire capable of legendary feats. The surplus food fed the armies that allowed the kingdom of Kush to occasionally march north, conquering and ruling Egypt itself for a time as its 25th dynasty. The distinctive, steep-sided pyramids that still stand at Meroe are not just tombs, they are monuments to a self-made agricultural power that mastered a challenging land and for a glorious period mastered its mighty neighbor as well. Far across the sea, another island civilization was mastering the art of water and grain, but in a world of its own. Ancient Japan did not simply grow rice, they sculpted their entire world around it. They looked at their mountainous archipelago and saw a canvas for water, carving entire valleys into shimmering staircases of flooded paddies. This was more than farming, it was landscape architecture on a grand scale. Their genius lay in absolute control over the water itself. They engineered intricate networks of canals, dikes, and sluice gates, drawing water from rivers and mountain springs to flood these terraced fields with mathematical precision. The water level in each paddy had to be perfect, not too deep to drown the young shoots, not too shallow to expose the roots. This was a communal ballet of liquid management, a shared responsibility that bound villages together. They became master breeders of the rice plant itself, developing hundreds of distinct varieties, each suited to a specific local condition, a particular soil type, or a different point in the growing season. But the true elegance of their system lay in its integration. They did not see a rice paddy as just a field, they saw it as a miniature ecosystem. They released fish into the flooded paddies where they would swim among the stalks, feeding on insect pests and weeds. The waste from these fish then acted as a natural, continuous fertilizer, nourishing the rice plants. This created a self-sustaining loop of food production, where one harvest supported the other. The entire agricultural year was a meticulously timed ritual, a dance with the seasons dictated by a collective calendar. The entire village would mobilize for the delicate work of transplanting the young rice seedlings from nursery beds into the main paddies, a back-breaking labor that had to be completed within a narrow window of time. This demand for intense, synchronized community effort forged a powerful social cohesion, a shared identity rooted in the mud of the fields. The incredible productivity of this wet rice system yielded a surplus so reliable it became the very measure of wealth. A lord's power was not counted in gold, but in koku, a unit of volume representing enough rice to feed one person for a full year. This rice-based economy funded the rise of the samurai class, warriors paid in stipends of rice, and it solidified the feudal system where land and its rice yield defined status. Rice became more than a staple, it became the soul of the nation, central to every meal, every festival, and every offering to the gods. From the careful hand of a farmer transplanting a seedling to the steel of a samurai sword, the entire culture was built upon the foundation of the paddy field. Long before the Maya shaped their floating gardens or the Aztecs built their chinampas, a foundational culture was already mastering the art of Mesoamerican farming. The Olmec civilization, flourishing in the swampy lowlands of the Gulf Coast, laid the agricultural bedrock for all that would follow. They were the original architects of the sacred trio, maize, beans, and squash, perfecting a companion planting technique that was nothing short of genius. In their fields, the corn stalks reached for the sun, providing a natural trellis for the climbing bean vines. Those beans, in turn, performed a kind of quiet magic, pulling nitrogen from the air and fixing it into the soil to nourish the hungry maize. And spreading below, the broad leaves of the squash created a living mulch, shading the soil to lock in moisture and suppress competing weeds. This was a self-sustaining ecosystem on a single plot of land, a symbiotic relationship that turned three separate plants into one powerful nutritional unit. But the Olmec did not stop there. They looked at the challenging, waterlogged terrain of their homeland and saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity. They became masters of land sculpture, constructing elaborate systems of raised fields. They built elevated planting platforms from layers of rich mud and vegetation dredged from the swamps, creating well-drained, incredibly fertile mounds that stood above the seasonal floods. These were not just simple garden beds, they were engineered landscapes that transformed unproductive wetlands into highly productive farmland. From this fertile foundation, they gave the world an incredible culinary inheritance. They were the first to domesticate the tomato, the avocado, and most importantly, the cacao tree. They learned to process the bitter cacao beans, grinding them and mixing them with water to create the world's first chocolate beverage, a thick, frothy drink reserved for rituals and elites. This agricultural abundance was the quiet engine behind their stunning cultural achievements. The surplus of food from their raised fields and companion plots freed up labor and resources, allowing them to carve the colossal stone heads that have become their signature, to build the first major ceremonial centers in Mesoamerica, and to establish trade networks that stretched for hundreds of miles. It was along these trade routes that their most precious commodities traveled, not just jade and obsidian, but the seeds of their knowledge, the very ideas of companion planting and chocolate cultivation, spreading their agricultural legacy deep into the heart of ancient Mexico. High on the Anatolian plateau, where the seasons brought baking summers and bitter winters, the Hittites built an empire of stone and law. Theirs was a land of rugged highlands, and their agricultural success came not from a single river's gift, but from a comprehensive system of rules and resilience. They cultivated hardy grains like emmer wheat and barley, crops that could withstand the plateau's harsh climate, but their true innovation was codifying farming itself. The Hittites left behind one of the most detailed legal codes of the ancient world, and it treated agriculture with the seriousness of statecraft. These were not mere suggestions, they were binding laws that governed everything from who owned a disputed field to the price of grain, from the penalties for letting your livestock trample a neighbor's crop to the precise value of a plow ox. This legal framework created a predictable, orderly agricultural economy, the bedrock of their power. To work their demanding land, Hittite farmers wielded a crucial advantage: iron. While other empires were still in the Bronze Age, the Hittites were pioneering the use of iron plowshares and tools. These implements were stronger and more durable than their bronze counterparts, allowing farmers to clear tougher lands and cultivate the soil more deeply and efficiently. Where the rainfall was insufficient, they engineered irrigation canals to channel water to their fields, demonstrating a flexible mastery of their environment. And they understood the need for security, building massive, state-controlled storage complexes for grain that could feed their cities and their armies through lean years and long sieges. This entire system, from the iron plow to the legal scroll, was designed to fuel one thing: the Hittite war machine. Their empire was a military powerhouse that directly challenged Egypt for control of the Levant. The food surpluses grown by their farmers fed the soldiers who marched into battle. The laws that protected their harvests also ensured a steady supply for military campaigns. Their control over fertile regions and trade routes for agricultural goods was a primary objective of their conquests. In the Hittite world, the scribe who recorded the grain laws was as vital as the soldier who wielded the sword, for it was the certainty of food that made the uncertainty of war possible. While the Hittites forged an empire with iron law, another civilization was mastering a softer, more fluid power. In the rich, silty expanse of the Red River Delta, the ancient Vietnamese performed a miracle of water and will. They transformed a low-lying plain prone to catastrophic floods into a shimmering, green sea of rice paddies, an achievement that required not just engineering but entire communities moving in sync. Their first and most vital task was to tame the river itself. They constructed colossal, interconnected dike systems, earthen walls that ran for kilometers, holding back the monsoon-swollen waters. This was not a one-time project, but a perpetual covenant with the land. Every year, the entire village would mobilize for the corvée labor, the communal duty of reinforcing and repairing these dikes. The strength of the wall was the strength of their society. Behind these protective barriers, they engineered a capillary network of canals and sluice gates, directing water with precision to every single field. Their fields were not just for rice, they were living ecosystems. Farmers practiced an ingenious form of polyculture, releasing fish into the flooded paddies. These fish would swim among the rice stalks, feeding on pests and weeds, while their waste provided a constant, natural fertilizer for the plants. This was a self-sustaining loop of food, a single plot producing both grain and protein. Their agricultural calendar was a relentless rhythm of multiple cropping. They grew different varieties of rice in succession, a fast-maturing strain for the spring and a more robust one for the autumn harvest, ensuring the land never rested and the granaries were always full. To supplement this bounty, they cultivated water spinach in the canals, a fast-growing green that thrived in the wet environment, and taro in the muddier patches, its starchy roots providing a vital staple. This incredible productivity did more than just fill bellies, it built nations. The surplus of rice from the delta fueled the rise of the first Vietnamese kingdoms, Van Lang and O Lac, allowing them to support a warrior class and a centralized administration. This agricultural wealth became the bedrock of resistance, funding a 1,000-year struggle against northern domination. The rice from these very fields fed the armies that eventually secured independence. To walk through the Vietnamese countryside today is to see this ancient system still breathing, a timeless landscape of communal labor and liquid green, where every harvest is a reminder of a civilization built not on conquest but on the collective mastery of water. The rugged spine of the Korean peninsula presented a formidable challenge, but ancient Korean farmers saw its mountains not as barriers but as blueprints. They carved its steep slopes into elegant staircases of terraced paddies, turning gravity itself into an ally. Mountain streams were captured and channeled through a network of bamboo pipes and cleverly dug canals, ensuring that every single level of these green stairways received its vital share of water. In the narrow river valleys below, they practiced an intensive form of wet rice agriculture, engineering the land into a perfect level grid of flooded fields. Their most crucial breakthrough, however, was breeding. They developed early maturing rice varieties that could race through the peninsula's relatively short growing season, a genetic innovation that guaranteed a harvest before the bitter autumn frosts could claim it. But their agricultural world was not built on rice alone. On the drier hillsides where paddies were impractical, they cultivated hardy millet, robust barley, protein-rich beans, and the treasured ginseng root, a medicinal plant so valued it became a cornerstone of trade. This diverse, resilient system was powered by advanced iron tools, plowshares and sickles that cut cleanly through the soil, and by the immense strength of oxen. These patient animals pulled plows through the heavy mud, multiplying the efforts of every farming family. The bounty that resulted did more than just feed villages, it built kingdoms. The agricultural surplus from these terraced hills and managed valleys fueled the rise of the three kingdoms, Goguryeo, Beech, and Silla. Rice became the ultimate measure of value, the very currency of the state used for taxation and to pay government officials. This deep connection between the land and power forged a unified Korean identity, an unbroken agricultural tradition that turned a mountainous peninsula into a cradle of enduring civilization. The ingenuity of Korean terracing finds a powerful echo in the watery heart of Southeast Asia. Ancient Thai communities mastered a landscape defined not by mountains but by monsoons. In the vast, low-lying Chao Phraya River basin, they faced a seasonal paradox, their fields submerged under meters of floodwater for months each year. Instead of fighting the deluge, they bred a rice that could rise with it, developing remarkable floating varieties. These plants possessed a stunning ability. Their stems could elongate by several centimeters each day, keeping their precious grain heads safely above the rising waterline. This was agricultural adaptation at its most elegant, a crop that literally floated to survival. Their methods required immense patience and coordination. They perfected the art of transplanting, first nurturing dense nurseries of young rice seedlings. When the time was right, entire villages would wade into the knee-deep water, carefully pulling up the young plants and moving them to the main paddies, spacing them out to give each room to grow. This labor-intensive process, which feels almost like gardening, resulted in dramatically stronger plants and far higher yields than simply scattering seeds. Their farms were not monocultures but vibrant, integrated ecosystems. Around the edges of the rice paddies, they planted fruit orchards and vegetable gardens, and they dug ponds that teemed with fish. This was a brilliant, self-sustaining cycle. The fish from the ponds provided protein for the family, while the nutrient-rich mud from the pond bottoms was dredged and used to fertilize the rice and fruit trees. To manage the precious water that defined their world, they constructed small-scale, community-owned weirs and canals, delicate structures of wood and bamboo that gently diverted and controlled the flow. From this fertile, well-managed environment came a true culinary treasure, the iconic aromatic rice. Its distinctive fragrance and flavor became legendary, a sought-after commodity traded across ancient Southeast Asia. This entire system of floating rice, transplanting, and integrated farming created an astonishingly productive and resilient food base. That agricultural wealth did not just fill bowls, it built the foundations of the great Sukhothai and Ayutthaya kingdoms, powerful states whose grandeur was literally fed by these paddies. Rice became so central that it shaped the Thai language, their festivals, and their very identity, a sacred bond between the people and the plains they had so skillfully cultivated. The ancient Sri Lankans looked upon a landscape of seasonal drought and saw not scarcity, but the potential for a perfectly orchestrated flow of water. They built a hydraulic civilization of breathtaking scale, transforming the island's dry zone into a lush green breadbasket. Their most monumental creations were the vast artificial reservoirs known as tanks, colossal structures like the Kalawiwa and Minaria that sprawled across the land. These were not simple ponds, but immense engineered lakes designed to capture and store the precious monsoon rains. holding back enough water to sustain agriculture through the long, rainless months. The real genius, however, was in the connection. They designed an intricate cascade system, a masterful sequence where water would be released from the largest central reservoir, flowing through canals to fill a series of progressively smaller tanks downstream. This was a watershed managed as a single, living entity, ensuring that not a single drop was wasted as it journeyed from the great tanks to the humblest village field. At the heart of this hydraulic symphony was rice. Sri Lankan farmers became master botanists, developing hundreds of distinct rice varieties, each one carefully selected for a specific soil type, a particular water level, or a unique place in the growing season. Their water management was a ritual of precision, with village committees meticulously controlling the sluice gates to deliver the exact amount of water needed for each stage of the plant's life, from the tender seedling to the heavy-headed grain. This self-replenishing system of water and grain supported the rise of magnificent urban centers like Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa, cities adorned with towering dagobas and sprawling palaces. For over 1,500 years, this civilization thrived, not by conquering its environment, but by weaving itself into the very rhythm of the island's water cycle, a timeless testament to the power of foresight and flow. While the Aksumites built their empire on teff, older Ethiopian farming traditions were quietly taking root in the highlands, cultivating a legacy that would outlast any single kingdom. These communities faced a world of steep slopes and unpredictable rains, and their response was to carve a permanent, living staircase into the mountains themselves. For centuries, they have built and maintained intricate stone terraces, walls that hold the precious soil in place, transforming eroding hillsides into lush, productive gardens. This was a long-term pact with the land, a promise to future generations written in stone. Their fields were a masterclass in diversity and resilience. Alongside the tiny, powerful grain of teff, they cultivated the plant that would wake the world, coffee. But their most ingenious crop was the inset, the false banana. This is not a plant grown for its fruit, but for its massive, starchy root and the tender heart of its trunk. Through a complex process of fermentation, these parts are transformed into a nutritious bread and porridge, a staple that can feed a family through the worst droughts. Enset is a perennial, a plant that lives for many years, and its deep root system makes it incredibly resistant to dry spells, acting as a natural food bank for entire communities. How do you build a stable civilization in a challenging environment? You cultivate a plant that guarantees no one will starve. These farmers did not see their crops and their animals as separate. Cattle were woven directly into the fabric of their agriculture, providing the manure that fertilized the terraced fields and the pulling power needed to break the ground. They practiced sophisticated crop rotation, moving between teff, barley, and legumes in a careful dance that kept the soil rich and productive year after year. This self-sustaining system, born from ancient wisdom, did more than just fill stomachs. It created a secure foundation that allowed unique Ethiopian cultures to flourish in the highlands. The surplus food from these terraced mountains supported the rise of population centers that became legendary hubs of learning and faith, some of the most enduring centers of Christian civilization in all of Africa. The true monument to these farmers is not a crumbling palace, but a thriving hillside, a living tapestry of green that has fed a nation for over 1,000 years. The desert kingdoms of ancient Yemen performed a miracle of hydro-engineering, turning one of the world's most arid landscapes into a garden of legendary wealth. Their most spectacular achievement was the Marib Dam, a colossal stone structure that harnessed the violent, unpredictable flash floods rushing down from the mountains. This was not a dam meant to create a permanent lake, but a brilliant diversion barrier. It captured the torrential seasonal waters and funneled them through a network of sluices and canals, irrigating an astonishing 25,000 acres of farmland in the valley below. For over 1,000 years, this single structure sustained the heart of the Sabaean kingdom, transforming a desert into a sea of grain, dates, and fruits. But their mastery of water extended far beyond this one monumental project. Across the rugged mountain slopes, they carved endless stone terraces, creating cascading stairways of green that captured every drop of precious rainfall, preventing it from washing uselessly into the barren plains below. In the vast desert regions where no grain would grow, they cultivated something even more valuable, the frankincense and myrrh trees. These aromatic resins, harvested from the gnarled bark of trees that grew nowhere else, became the most coveted commodities of the ancient world, worth more than their weight in gold. This agricultural and aromatic wealth did not just fill local granaries, it built a global trade network. Camel caravans laden with incense journeyed north to the empires of the Mediterranean, while Yemeni ships sailed the Indian Ocean, connecting their desert ports to India and beyond. The riches that flowed back funded the construction of towering, mud-brick skyscrapers and magnificent temples, like the famous Moon Temple of Marib. It supported the flourishing of the Sabaean language and a sophisticated culture whose inscriptions tell a story of a people who did not pray for rain from the heavens, but who built their own rivers from stone and sheer human ingenuity. The Sumerians did not invent farming, but they perfected its organization on a scale never before seen. In the fertile but challenging land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they faced a landscape of marshes and unpredictable floods. Their first and most vital task was to command the water, and they did so with breathtaking ambition. They engineered the world's first extensive networks of irrigation canals, carefully planned channels that diverted floodwaters to their fields and drained the swamps. This was more than digging ditches. It was a complete re-engineering of the environment, turning a watery wilderness into a predictable, productive breadbasket. Their most revolutionary tool was the plow. Before the Sumerians, farmers used simple digging sticks, but the Sumerians, harnessing the power of oxen, created an animal-drawn plow that could tear through the heavy soil, turning it over to prepare a perfect bed for seeds. This single invention multiplied their power 100-fold, allowing a single farmer to cultivate vast areas that once required dozens of hands, but their genius for organization went even deeper. They looked at their fields and understood a fundamental truth that soil grows tired. So they devised systematic crop rotation, methodically planting barley one season and then shifting to legumes or letting the field rest, a practice that kept the earth fertile year after year. Their fields flourished with barley, the grain that became the true staple of their civilization, used for their daily bread and for brewing beer. They cultivated sweet dates in vast orchards and grew onions, garlic, and lentils that added vital variety to their diet. This incredible productivity created something the world had never seen, a true food surplus, and this surplus changed everything. It meant that not every person had to work the land. This abundance allowed for specialization, for the first time freeing people to become full-time potters, weavers, soldiers, priests, and scribes. It was this agricultural wealth that built the world's first cities like Ur and Uruk with their towering ziggurats. The need to manage this surplus, to record harvests and distribute rations, led directly to one of humanity's greatest inventions, writing. The earliest clay tablets are not poetry or history, they are agricultural accounts, lists of grain, and records of livestock. From the need to count bushels of barley came the written word. Their entire social structure was built upon this foundation, with temple and palace administrations acting as central banks and warehouses, organizing the labor, storing the grain, and distributing the food that fed the city. The Sumerian farmer, guiding his ox-drawn plow through a field fed by a man-made canal, was not just growing food, he was laying the groundwork for law, for commerce, for urban life, for civilization itself. Long before the Hittites forged their empire of iron, the ancient peoples of Anatolia were weaving a rich agricultural tapestry from the land itself. The Hattians and other early cultures did not see Asia Minor as a single territory, but as a collection of distinct ecological worlds, each offering its own unique bounty. From the lush coastal plains lapped by the Aegean to the windswept central plateau, they cultivated a stunning variety of crops that would one day spread across the globe. They were the original domesticators of the cherry and the almond, transforming wild trees into reliable sources of food. In their fields, they grew lentils and chickpeas, the protein-packed staples that would become the foundation of diets across 3 continents. And remarkably, evidence from pottery residues tells us they were cultivating grapes and practicing viticulture as early as the Bronze Age, pressing fruit into a fermented drink long before wine became a Mediterranean luxury. Their farming was a dance with the seasons, a rhythmic movement across the landscape. They practiced transhumance, a timeless cycle of driving their herds of sheep and goats up to the cool, highland pastures in the summer and back down to the sheltered valleys when winter's bite arrived. This mobility ensured their animals always had fresh grass, while their manure naturally fertilized different parts of the land. In the rugged mountains, they became masters of the terrace, carving flat steps into the slopes to capture rainfall and create stable, productive farmland where none seemed possible. They possessed an intuitive understanding of their soil, recognizing that the mineral-rich earth found in volcanic regions produced particularly robust crops, and they sought out these fertile zones. To protect their hard-won harvest from thieves and the elements, they dug deep, bell-shaped underground silos, clever subterranean chambers that kept grain cool, dry, and safe for lean seasons. This incredible diversity of food production did more than just sustain villages. It built the first sophisticated urban centers in the region. The agricultural wealth flowing from the coasts, the plateaus, and the mountains turned Anatolia into one of the ancient world's great crossroads. It was here that the farming knowledge of Europe, Asia, and Africa met and mingled, where new seeds and techniques were exchanged, tested, and adopted. The quiet, persistent work of these Anatolian farmers created a foundation of plenty that would, for millennia, make this land a prize for every empire to come. Between the mountains and the desert, a ribbon of green proved more valuable than any silk. The ancient Central Asians, the Bactrians and Sogdians, looked upon a harsh world of extremes and saw possibility in the river oases. They became masters of the fertile pocket, channeling snowmelt from distant peaks through thousands of kilometers of underground canals and surface channels called carrés. These were not mere ditches, but feats of precise engineering, gently sloping to bring life-giving water across the arid plains without a single drop lost to evaporation. In these man-made Edens, they cultivated an orchard of delights. They were the original horticulturalists for much of the world, perfecting the peach and the apricot, cultivating pistachios and walnuts, and pressing the region's distinctive grapes into wines that would be celebrated from China to Rome. Their fields were models of efficiency, yielding not one, but 2 harvests each year in a practice called double cropping, growing fast-maturing grains alongside their precious fruits. They bred wheat and barley that could shrug off drought, their roots seeking every hint of moisture in the soil, and they understood the perfect cycle of the farm, where their herds of sheep, goats, and Bactrian camels provided more than just meat and wool. The manure from these animals was carefully collected to fertilize the orchards, while the camels themselves, the ships of the desert, carried the resulting bounty along the trade routes. This was the true secret of the Silk Road. The vibrant cities of Samarkand and Bukhara were not just stops on a long journey, they were destinations in themselves powered by agricultural wealth. A merchant could rest in a shaded courtyard, tasting a peach that seemed to hold the sweetness of the mountains themselves, or sip a wine that spoke of a land between worlds. The food grown here did not just feed the local population, it became a global commodity, a taste of Central Asian ingenuity that fueled the exchange of ideas and goods across a continent. Their farms were the quiet, green engines of the greatest trading network the ancient world had ever known. Deep beneath the scorching sands of the Sahara, the Garamontes built a hidden world of water. In a landscape that received almost no rain, they survived by tapping into ancient aquifers, vast stores of prehistoric water trapped deep below the desert floor. Their tool for this miracle was the fagara, a sophisticated underground irrigation system that required immense communal effort. Teams of workers would dig a series of vertical shafts down to the water table, then connect them at the bottom with a gently sloping tunnel that could stretch for many kilometers. This tunnel would guide the water purely by gravity from the aquifer to their fields and settlements. Because the water flowed in this cool, dark channel, it was protected from the evaporating fury of the desert sun, a secret river flowing silently beneath the dunes. On the surface, this life-giving water allowed the Garamontes to create a startling sight, lush agricultural hubs in the absolute middle of nowhere. They did not just grow a single crop, they engineered entire ecosystems. Their most brilliant creation was the multi-story oasis garden. At the top, the towering canopy of date palms provided a protective roof, casting a dappled shade that cooled the ground below. In this manufactured shade, they cultivated smaller, shade-tolerant fruit trees like figs and pomegranates. And at the very ground level, they grew vegetables and fodder crops like barley and beans. This was vertical farming, ancient style, a way to maximize every single drop of their precious water across 3 layers of food production. Beyond the oases, they practiced a form of dry land farming that was an art of conservation. They sowed hardy strains of barley and wheat, using techniques like deep planting to reach residual soil moisture and creating small catchments to funnel every possible drop of rainfall to the roots of their plants. They even cultivated specialized desert flora like the henna plant, whose leaves were dried and ground into the reddish powder used for body art and hair dye, a valuable product for trade. This entire agricultural system, from the hidden fagaras to the shaded oases, did more than just feed a people, it built a forgotten kingdom. The Garamontes supported fortified towns and a capital city, all sustained by their hydrological genius. Their agricultural surplus gave them the power to control the trans-Saharan trade routes, their camel caravans becoming the vital link that connected the Mediterranean world of Rome and Carthage with the rich cultures of sub-Saharan Africa. They were the essential middlemen, the desert-dwelling masters who proved that even the most barren land could bloom with enough knowledge and will. Across the forests and river valleys of ancient Europe, the Celtic peoples forged an agricultural system that thrived on integration. They did not see a farm as just a field for crops or a pasture for animals, but as a single, unified organism where each part supported the other. Their most vital tool for breaking the tough, heavy soils of northern Europe was the ard, a simple but effective early plow with an iron-tipped share. It did not turn the soil over completely, but it cut a deep, clean furrow, creating a perfect bed for their hardy grains. They cultivated spelt and emmer wheat, ancient varieties of grain that could withstand cooler, wetter climates alongside robust barley. But the true brilliance of their system lay in the cycle they created. Their livestock, particularly their prized cattle, were not kept separate. The animals grazed on fallow fields and woodland pastures, and their manure was systematically collected and returned to the cultivated plots, a continuous, natural renewal of the soil's vitality. They practiced a form of crop rotation, moving between grains and legumes, understanding that this dance kept the earth from becoming exhausted. To protect the bounty of their harvests through the long, harsh winters, they engineered remarkable underground storage pits. These were not simple holes in the ground, but carefully constructed silos, often lined with stone or woven wood and sealed with clay, creating an airtight environment that preserved grain for months, safe from rot and rodents. This deep understanding of the land, from the iron of their tools to the science of their storage, allowed them to support large, concentrated populations. Their fortified settlements, known as oppida, were not just hilltop forts but thriving centers of trade and craft, all fed by the agricultural surplus from the surrounding countryside. This expertise did not vanish with the arrival of Rome. In fact, the Romans, for all their own engineering prowess, recognized and adopted many Celtic farming methods, from their use of the heavier wheeled plow to their sophisticated crop rotation. The Celtic farmer, guiding his ox drawn hard through a field that fed both his family and his chieftain, was laying the groundwork for the agricultural landscape of medieval Europe, a legacy written not in stone, but in the very soil they so skillfully tended. They carried entire gardens across the ocean. The ancient Pacific Islanders did not simply find new homes, they built them from the ground up, transporting a portable ecosystem in their voyaging canoes to colonize the most isolated islands on Earth. Their greatest challenge was not the voyage itself, but what to do when they arrived on a speck of land surrounded by endless sea. Their survival depended on an intimate knowledge of plants, a deep understanding of their new home's microenvironments, and the ability to recreate a familiar world in an utterly foreign one. In the wet, lush valleys, they became hydrological artists, sculpting the earth into intricate pond fields for their most vital crop, taro. They built stone-walled terraces that captured and channeled fresh spring water, creating a constant, slow-moving flow through the fields. The taro's roots, the corms, grew in this cool, muddy water, producing a starchy staple that was the very foundation of their diet. On the drier, leeward slopes of the same island, they practiced a completely different kind of farming. Here, they cultivated the hardy sweet potato in vast, mulched gardens, using volcanic rock or organic matter to lock moisture into the soil and protect the tender plants from the harsh sun. And rising above it all were the breadfruit trees planted in managed groves that resembled natural forests. These trees were living larders, their starchy, nutritious fruits capable of being fermented in underground pits to create a long-lasting food reserve that could feed a community through lean times. But their genius did not stop at the shoreline. They looked at the boundary between land and sea and saw another opportunity, engineering massive shoreline fish ponds. They built stone walls that extended into the lagoons, creating enclosed areas where they could raise and harvest fish, a form of sustainable aquaculture that provided a reliable source of protein. Their entire approach was one of integration, a forest gardening system where useful trees for food, medicine, fiber, and wood were interplanted to create a self-sustaining, productive ecosystem that mimicked the natural forest but served human needs. Every plant had a purpose and every part of the landscape was used. The coconut palm was not just a tree, it was a life-sustaining marvel, providing water, milk, oil, fiber for cordage, and wood for building. The banana plant gave fruit and its broad leaves became biodegradable plates and food wrappers. Sugar cane offered a quick source of energy. This was not a struggle against nature, but a profound collaboration with it. This agricultural toolkit, carried across thousands of miles of open ocean, allowed them to successfully settle the Pacific from the high islands of Hawaii to the temperate shores of New Zealand. It was this deep-rooted knowledge that allowed distinct, complex cultures to blossom in isolation, each one a unique adaptation of an ancient seafaring wisdom, proving that the greatest voyages are not just across the water, but into the very heart of the land itself. For centuries, the Amazon was seen as a pristine wilderness, a place where complex societies could never take root. The dense jungle floor was thought to be too poor, too acidic, to support the agriculture needed for cities. But we were wrong. Deep within the rainforest, archaeologists have uncovered a secret hidden in the very soil itself, a black earth so rich and fertile it feels alien in the surrounding red clay. This is terra preta, the dark earth, and it was not a natural gift but a human invention. Ancient Amazonian farmers created this super soil through a deliberate, centuries-long process of enrichment. They mixed charcoal from their cooking fires, broken pottery, food waste like fish bones and turtle shells, and composted vegetation into the poor native earth. This was not casual disposal, it was a recipe for life. The charcoal acted like a sponge, locking nutrients into the soil and preventing them from washing away in the torrential rains, while the organic matter fed a thriving microbial world. The result was a self-regenerating soil that remains incredibly fertile to this day, a living legacy of an ancient agricultural science. This fertile foundation allowed them to practice a form of farming that mimicked the forest itself. They did not clear-cut vast fields, but created vibrant food forests, a practice we now call agroforestry. They would cultivate towering Brazil nut trees for their protein-rich seeds, shade-loving cacao for its precious beans, and sprawling rubber trees for their latex. Beneath this protective canopy, they grew their annual staples. In the drier uplands, they domesticated cassava, a tough root crop that they learned to process, grinding and pressing it to remove its natural cyanide and transform it into a versatile flour. In the seasonally flooded lowlands, they became hydrological engineers, constructing raised fields. They built large mounds of earth above the water level, creating well-drained islands of fertile soil where they could grow crops like maize and sweet potatoes even during the annual inundations. These fields were surrounded by canals that teemed with aquatic life, creating a system that produced both protein and grain from the same managed landscape. Their botanical knowledge was staggering. They gave the world foods we now take for granted, domesticating the peanut, the pineapple, and countless varieties of chili peppers and fruits, each one bred for a specific soil type, a particular amount of sunlight, or a unique taste. This was not a scattered, nomadic existence. The sheer productivity of the terra preta soils and the agroforestry systems they nurtured supported substantial, settled populations. Vast networks of towns and villages connected by straight causeway roads once thrived where we once saw only untouched jungle. The scale of this transformation rewrites our entire understanding of the Amazon. It was not a virgin wilderness, but a managed, cultivated landscape, a garden forest shaped by human hands over thousands of years. These civilizations did not live lightly on the land. They actively improved it, engineering a fertility that has outlasted their own cities. The dark earth they left behind is more than just soil. It is a message from the past, a testament to a different way of living with the rainforest, not against it. The Assyrians took the agricultural foundations of Mesopotamia and forged them into an instrument of imperial power. While their predecessors mastered the shaduf and the canal, the Assyrians built a command economy where every drop of water and every bushel of grain served the state. Their empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Nile, and feeding it required more than just fertile soil. It demanded absolute organization. At the heart of this system was a sprawling, meticulously maintained network of irrigation canals, but these were not managed by local villages. They were state property, supervised by imperial administrators whose records detail every repair, every cleaning, and the precise allocation of water to different regions. This was hydraulic management with military precision, ensuring that the breadbasket of the empire never failed. Their farmers became specialists, particularly in the art of the date palm. They discovered the secret of sexual reproduction in these trees and perfected the technique of artificial pollination. A skilled climber would scale the male tree, collect its pollen, and then carefully dust it onto the flowers of the female trees. This deliberate act guaranteed a bountiful, predictable harvest of sweet dates, a vital source of sugar and nutrition that could be easily stored and transported. But their agricultural vision extended beyond mere production. The Assyrian kings established the world's first comprehensive botanical gardens, vast living libraries at capital cities like Nineveh. Here, they collected and cultivated plants, trees, and herbs from every conquered territory. Soldiers and envoys returned with strange seeds and saplings from the mountains of Anatolia, the forests of Lebanon, and the plains of Iran. Royal botanists would study these new species, experimenting with grafting and crossbreeding to develop hardier fruits, more fragrant herbs, and more potent medicinal plants. This was not gardening for pleasure. It was a state-sponsored research and development program aimed at improving the empire's agricultural portfolio. The result was an incredible diversity on the Assyrian plate, from pomegranates and grapes to leeks and cucumbers, many of which we still enjoy today. Their legacy is etched into thousands of cuneiform tablets, which record not just conquests but crop yields, ideal planting times, and sophisticated storage methods to prevent rot and pest infestation. This immense agricultural wealth, so carefully managed and relentlessly optimized, was the true engine of the Assyrian war machine. It fed the vast armies that marched under the symbol of the winged bull, supplied the administrative centers that governed the empire, and filled the trading caravans that connected the known world. The Assyrian farmer, pollinating a date palm under the watchful eye of a royal inspector, was not just growing food, he was fueling an empire built on administrative genius and a relentless hunger for growth. From the managed rainforests of the Amazon, we traveled to the high valleys of Mexico, where the Zapotec people looked upon steep, rugged slopes and saw not limitation, but the foundation for a city in the sky. In the Oaxaca Valley, they carved the very mountains into a staircase of green, building intricate stone terraces that cascaded down the hillsides. These were not mere garden plots, but feats of landscape engineering. Each stone wall held back tons of earth, creating level planting surfaces where none existed before, and in doing so, they performed a vital act of conservation, preventing the precious topsoil from washing away in the violent summer rains. Their genius, however, did not stop at holding the earth in place. They became masters of capturing every drop of water in a land where rain was a seasonal gift. They engineered canals and dams to channel seasonal rainfall from the highlands, creating a reliable irrigation network that turned the arid valley slopes into a patchwork of productive farms. On these man-made plains, they cultivated the sacred triad of maize, beans, and squash, but their agricultural vision was far richer. Their fields and orchards burst with the vibrant flavors that would one day conquer the world: the first domesticated tomatoes, the fiery kick of chili peppers, and the creamy richness of avocados. In the valley bottoms where the land was wetter, they employed another stroke of brilliance, constructing chinampa-like raised fields. By piling up nutrient-rich mud and vegetation into elevated beds, they created well-drained, highly fertile islands that could produce bumper crops year after year. All of this bounty needed to be protected, and the Zapotec developed sophisticated storage techniques, building granaries that kept their maize dry and safe from pests, ensuring a steady food reserve that could see the population through lean years. This robust and resilient agricultural system was the engine that powered a cultural explosion. The food surplus grown on those terraced hills fed the laborers and artisans who built the magnificent urban center of Monte Albon, a city literally carved from a mountaintop. It allowed for specialization, freeing individuals to become master potters, skilled weavers, and gifted astronomers. It was this foundation of plenty that provided the stability and intellectual space for the Zapotec to develop one of the earliest forms of writing in the Americas and a complex calendar system, innovations that would echo through Mesoamerican history for centuries. Their story is one of a civilization that did not simply find a home in a challenging landscape, but one that sculpted the land itself into a source of enduring power. The mountains were not empty before the Inca. Long before their terraces carved the high slopes, other Andean civilizations were already solving the riddles of this vertical world. Along the arid Pacific coast, the Moch people faced a landscape of stark contrasts, where fertile river valleys cut through one of the planet's driest deserts. Their genius was to stretch these ribbons of green, building monumental canals that snaked for dozens of kilometers, channeling water from the Andes to the parched plains. These were not simple ditches, but feats of precise engineering, carved through rock and earth with a gradient so exact the water flowed steadily for miles, bringing life to the desert. They turned sun-baked sand into fields of maize, peanuts, and beans, creating an agricultural powerhouse that fueled their elaborate ceremonial centers and masterful ceramic art. Meanwhile, high on the Altiplano, the Tiwanaku confronted a different enemy, the brutal frost of the thin air near Lake Titicaca. Their solution was a system of raised fields so clever it feels almost modern. They dug a network of canals and used the excavated soil to build wide, elevated planting beds surrounded by water. This was hydrological magic. The water in the canals absorbed the sun's heat during the day, then radiated it back throughout the night, creating a protective thermal blanket that kept the crops on the raised platforms from freezing. This microclimate engineering allowed them to grow potatoes and quinoa at a breathtaking altitude of over 3,800 meters, achieving what seemed impossible year-round agriculture in the roof of the world. These civilizations were the original plant breeders of the Andes, patiently domesticating a stunning array of crops we are only now rediscovering. They did not just grow the potato, they developed hundreds of distinct varieties, each one adapted to a specific elevation, soil type, and microclimate. Alongside it, they cultivated the protein-rich grain quinoa, the tuberous oca with its tangy flavor, and the vibrant aluco, a hardy root that could store for months. This was a living library of genetic resilience, a testament to thousands of years of observation and selective breeding. The intricate canal networks of the Moch, the frost-defying raised fields of the Tiwanaku, and this incredible biodiversity were not lost to history. They became the inherited toolkit, the foundational wisdom upon which the Inca would later build their own agricultural empire, proving that the true mastery of the Andes was a cumulative achievement, a legacy written in water, stone, and seed across the centuries. These ancient fields are not just relics of a forgotten past. They are living foundations, their wisdom echoing through our modern farms and on our very plates. The terraces that cling to mountains in Peru and the Philippines are not merely scenic, they are masterclasses in erosion control, a lesson we are relearning as our own topsoil blows away. The crop rotation meticulously practiced by Roman farmers is the direct ancestor of the sustainable methods we now champion to break pest cycles and nurture tired earth. The agroforestry of the Amazon, with its vibrant food forests, is being studied as a powerful alternative to the monocultures that dominate our landscapes. This is not nostalgia, it is a practical toolkit for survival. The most profound gift from these ancient masters is the genetic library they left us. That incredible diversity of potatoes cultivated by the Andean farmers, the thousands of rice varieties bred in the paddies of Asia, the myriad types of maize developed across the Americas, these are not just historical curiosities. They are a treasure trove of genetic resilience. When a new pest or a shifting climate threatens one of our modern, uniform crops, scientists turn to these ancient varieties, searching for the genes for drought tolerance, disease resistance, or nutritional strength that were carefully preserved by farmers millennia ago. Our future food security is being underwritten by their foresight. Their understanding of water speaks directly to our current crises. The Khanats of Persia and the tank cascades of Sri Lanka teach us how to manage a scarce resource with elegant efficiency, capturing every drop without waste. The raised fields of the Maya and the Tiwanaku show us how to farm in harmony with floods and frosts, creating microclimates that defy environmental extremes. In an era of deepening droughts and unpredictable weather, this ancient hydrological intelligence is more valuable than ever. The ultimate lesson from these 35 civilizations is a shift in perspective. They did not see nature as an adversary to be conquered, but as a partner to be understood. Their greatest achievements came from observing, adapting, and collaborating with the rhythms of the land and the water. They built civilizations that lasted for centuries, even millennia, on a foundation of balance. In our pursuit of ever greater yields, we have often forgotten that fundamental truth. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that true sustainability is not a new technology, but a very old wisdom waiting for us to listen once more. This journey through 35 ancient civilizations reveals a single profound truth: that the plow was mightier than the sword. Every towering pyramid, every written word, every philosophical debate was built upon a foundation of grain, of rice, of potatoes. The true monuments of the ancient world are not just the stones of Angkor Wat or the ziggurats of Ur, but the terraced slopes of the Andes and the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan. These societies did not simply find food, they invented it through a breathtaking collaboration with the forces of nature. They listened to the rhythm of the rivers and the language of the soil, and they answered with canals that defied deserts and raised fields that conquered frost. Their legacy is not locked away in museums, but lives on in every bite we take. The bread on your table carries the echo of the first wheat domesticated in Mesopotamia. The rice in your bowl connects you to the patient breeders of ancient Japan. The potato on your plate is a testament to the Andean farmers who unlocked its thousands of varieties. This ancient wisdom is more than history, it is a living inheritance. As we face our own challenges with water and soil, we are turning back to their playbook, rediscovering the power of terrace agriculture, the genius of polyculture, and the resilience of forgotten crops. Their story is a reminder that our greatest strength lies not in dominating the natural world, but in understanding our place within it. Which of these master farmers left you in awe? Was it the hydrological artists of Sri Lanka or the desert engineers of the Garamontes? Let us know which civilization's agricultural genius impressed you the most in the comments below. If you enjoyed this exploration into the roots of human civilization, be sure to subscribe for more journeys into our shared past. Until next time, remember that with every meal, you are tasting the culmination of 10,000 years of human ingenuity.